This is part 5 of the Craftsman Emerson Gen 4 Rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 4, click the link at the top of the screen. Welcome back and Happy New Year. In this video, we'll be cleaning a lot of the parts with a wire wheel and wet sanding some of them. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. First thing we're going to be working on is the pulleys, both the motor pulley and the spindle pulley. And on a Gen 4, you can remove the pulley from the spindle pulley insert. So we can use that insert and connect the pulley back to it and then put that inside my lathe. And here we're just dry sanding this with some 220. And we're not going to polish these pulleys because they're covered by the cover. So it's not like a 100 or a 150 where the pulleys are exposed, and so a lot of times I'll polish those up. But just cleaning them, getting some of that film that's on them, you know, a lot of the parts that are made out of Zamic get that film on them, especially if you try to clean them in the citric acid for any period of time. But you can't really eliminate that film, and you can clean them up with just steel wool. That would be fine as well, but I like doing it with the sandpaper. And again, this is just 220. So we do both of these pulleys, and then we'll move on to the next part. So the next part we're going to clean is the pulley insert, and you can see where the pulley sits on that insert. It's kind of discolored, and I've seen these in real bad shape. This one's not in too bad a shape, but we're going to wet sand it, and we're going to run through 400, 600, 800, and 1000 grit. We're not trying to take a whole lot off of here. We just want to clean it up. So this is the same process that we did with the column. Whenever we wet sand, we progressively increase the grit, and between each grit we're going to wet the item and wipe it off to remove the remaining grit that's on it before we progress to that next higher grit of sandpaper. We're not using a lot of pressure here. We don't want to take a whole lot of metal off of this because there are bearings that sit on this, and we actually want them to fit kind of tight. It would be perfectly fine just to hit it with some 600 and then call it a day. But I'm going to polish it, so I'm going all the way up to 1000. And then we're going to flip it over and do the other half, or the other part that's inside the chuck right now. So just remember to rinse between each grit. I mean, I can't underline that enough on how important that is. So here we've already flipped it and cleaned the other half, so now we're ready to go ahead and apply. This is Mother's Mag and Aluminum Polish, same stuff we used on the column, and it just really polishes up bare metal. It does a fantastic job. And obviously I need to get a new container of this stuff. I go through it. This has lasted me quite a while though, but it is a consumable if you're cleaning a bunch of stuff like I do. So we apply the polish on there. And then we've got one of these ShamWows that we're going to just buff all that polish back off. And if you don't have a metal lathe, you could rig up something with a cordless drill even. But I have a metal lathe, so that's why I use it. And again, polishing this stuff isn't required for rebuilding. I mean, you could take each one of these pieces after they came out of the citric acid and hit them with a Scotch-Brite pad or some steel wool, and then just apply a lubricant to them to keep them from rusting, and you'd be fine. So we're going to polish that last part there that was in the chuck. I'm going to apply that Mother's Mag and aluminum polish on it. And I'm not going to polish a whole lot of stuff for this drill press, because a lot of it really isn't seen on, like I said with the pulleys, on a 100 and a 150, there's a lot of metal that's exposed, and that's why I polish a lot of that metal, because it looks better. But functionally, it's fine. It doesn't have to be polished. But with the Emerson Gen 2s, 3s, and 4s, most of these parts are, completely hidden. Nobody will see them. There's no real reason to go ahead and polish them up. Like this piece here, nobody's ever going to see it. I mean, it's inside the head casting, but I wanted to eliminate. This is one of the parts, like I said, that has bearings on it. And if you've ever watched my video on runout, there are 4 basic sources of runout on a drill press, because that's where bearings make contact. And so every one of those areas, if you can get them really smooth and clean, would help to eliminate runout. And this is the Quill, and we're basically going to do the same thing here. But with the Quill, you've got that gear rack on it. So I'm going to clean in between each one of these teeth, if you will, with some Q-tips. And I'm going to do that several times throughout this process. So with the Quill, we're going to polish it as well. So we are going to sand it from 400, 600, 800, all the way to 1,000. And this will be a lot more of a cut footage for this, because I've showed you the process already with the pulley insert. So really, there's no reason to beat a dead horse. Here's 1,000 grit. And if you've got a drill press that's sat for a long time and it's got rust on it, or a lot of rust on it, for instance, you guys saw how hard it was to get this drill press apart, and there was a good amount of rust on the column and on this Quill, where these parts had basically sat inside their bores. And so you had metal to metal contact, and that metal to metal contact was just like a rust ring. And there was one on this as well. And we've basically gotten rid of that at this point by doing this process. So just remember to rinse between each grit. And then we'll flip that sucker over and do that last bit there, that last inch, or inch and a half, inch and a quarter, whatever that is. Same thing. We're already at 1,000. We're just going to blend that with the rest of the Quill, so you don't have a line there. And then we'll rinse off the quill and wipe it down. Then we're going to come back with some Q-tips and clean between those teeth again on the gear rack. And we're doing that because there's probably some sandpaper grit in there. And when we apply the polish, we don't want to try to polish this with sandpaper grit. It's just going to not be effective as far as polishing. So same thing, Mother's Mag and aluminum polish. Now if you want to get real crazy after you do this, then you can come back and buff in between each one of those teeth and gears with a small buffing wheel on a Dremel. I won't be doing that on this rebuild, but I've done it in the past. So using the ShamWow and just buffing that polish off of there. And if you're wondering, my lathe is set at 640 RPMs. That's pretty much what I run it at when I'm doing sanding and polishing. And obviously, if you're unskilled at working with a lathe, those jaws on that chuck are unforgiving. It's real easy to lose a finger if you don't know what you're doing. And lastly, we're just going to clean between each one of those teeth again on the rack. And that's going to do the quill. So we'll pull it out of there. All right, so here we are over at my grinder, and I've got a wire wheel on there. It's a brass wire wheel. And we're going to clean up the spindle. So a lot of times I'll polish the spindle, kind of like how you saw me do the quill and the pulley insert. But on this drill press, this spindle is in really good condition. So I'm thinking that the wire wheel is going to clean it up enough. So I'm just trying to get the wire wheel in between each one of those grooves or teeth that are on the splines on the end right now. But we're going to clean the entire spindle. Here we are cleaning just the taper with this wire wheel. And that's all we're going to do with it on this rebuild. We're not going to polish it. We're not going to sand it. We will apply a penetrating oil coat to it, but that'll happen near the end of this video. So after we finished with the spindle, here we are with the pinion, and kind of the same thing. We're cleaning between the gears, and then we'll clean the rest of the body of the pinion on the wire wheel. We are going to sand and polish, well, we'll sand the pinion. And the reason for that is because the pinion has a good amount of rust on it, and there's some pitting. So we're going to try to clean some of that up. So after we finish with the wire wheel, we'll take the pinion over to the lathe. And here you can see between the hole there and my fingers, there's kind of a band that's pitting there. And so we're going to try to clean that up. Since we're not going to worry about the gears or the teeth part, we can chuck that into the lathe. And then we're going to wet sand the main part of the body though. So we'll start with the 400. And we're going to just go through all the different grits. And this is what it looks like after 1,000, or we're doing the 1,000 now. And you can still see that pitting there, but we've smoothed it out a good bit. I don't think I have that thing perfectly aligned in that chuck. It's kind of wobbly, but not a problem. And that's all we're going to do with the pinion. We're not going to polish it. So we'll pull that out and set it aside. Back over at the wire wheel. This is the depth stop rod, or at least that's what they're called on the Gen 4s. On your older 100s and 150s, it's called the feed stop rod, but kind of the same thing. Starting with the Gen 3s, the depth scale was moved from the rod and placed on the side of the head casting. So the depth stop rod on a Gen 3 and a Gen 4 is just a blank rod. There's no scale on it. And that's going to do it for the depth stop rod. Next, we've got the feed handle rods. And there are 3 of these. So I'm just going to show you one, otherwise this video will be an hour and a half long. But real simple. Just hitting it with the wire wheel, cleaning it up. And then this is the adjustment rod. This is the rod that's used to push out on the motor mount to adjust the distance between the motor pulley and the spindle pulley and tension your belt. This thing was really pitted as well. I think it's just a 1/4 inch steel rod. So replacing it wouldn't be a real big issue, but we'll clean it up. It'll still work perfectly fine. And next, I'm just going to clean up the ends of the shaft that's on the rotor. So obviously, goes without saying that this is really dangerous, and if we go to the other side, like I'm about to do, it gets even more dangerous, because if that wire wheel grabs any of those fan blades, that thing's going to come flying out of my hand. It'll hit the ground, possibly break, get damaged. I might get hurt in the process. So I guess in the big swing of things, this is not advised for you if you are uncomfortable working around these kinds of tools. But for me, not a big deal. I do stuff like this every day. So if you don't want to do this and you don't have a grinder, you could just take some steel wool and rub it up and down on that shaft. Leave that to your imagination and clean it up that way. So next we have the Jacob's chuck body, and this is another piece that's pretty dangerous to try to run in the lathe or on a wire wheel like this, because all it takes is that wire wheel to grab where the cutouts for the jaws are on that center ring, and that thing will go flying. And this is the sleeve for the Jacob's chuck. We're just cleaning between those teeth, and then we'll clean the body of it. Pretty simple, pretty easy to do. And in some of my previous videos, I polish the Jacob's chuck, but we're not going to polish it either. So all of those parts except for the Jacob's chuck parts that we've cleaned in this video, we're going to coat with this super slick stuff. It's a penetrating oil. I like it. It smells citrusy, and it does a great job of coating the metal to help protect it. So we're just going to spray it onto all these parts. And we'll let it sit there for a little bit. I think that was a piece of Q-tip that came out of that. Some of the cotton. So next we've got the spindle. And then we've got the two pulleys. So one of those pulleys, the motor pulley, has a bushing sleeve inside there that's steel. So you're going to want to definitely make sure that that is coated so that it doesn't rust. But the Zamek shouldn't rust. It'll just get ugly over time. Then we've got the rotor. Then we're going to wipe these parts down. If we let that super slick stuff just sit on them, over time it'll kind of jelly. I don't know how to really explain it. So I've gotten a habit of, once I coat the parts, I'll let them sit for a minute or two, and then I'm going to wipe them down a little bit. So they've still got the coating on there, but it's not dripping, if you will. And again, this is just to keep these parts from rusting again. And it's not a permanent solution. Once you've taken something down to bare metal, depending on where you live and the humidity, what it's exposed to, it'll rust again over time. This just slows that process down. And I probably said it in a previous video, but I don't like using WD-40 for this. WD-40 has water in it, and it's only a matter of time before that will definitely allow the metal to rust. So you definitely want a penetrating oil that's a protectorant. But that's going to wrap up this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. In the next video, we've got more parts to clean, including the table and some other stuff. So there will be more wide wheeling. There will be using more sanding and just cleaning up the rest of the parts so that we can get on to the painting and then assembly. But as always, I appreciate the support. And if you got questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section below. Again, the owner's manuals are in the description of the video, and I will see you next time.